It was a quiet evening at the restaurant, the kind where the hum of conversations mixed with the distant clatter of dishes. Chef Daniel wiped his hands on his apron, taking a deep breath after another long shift. The place was finally slowing down, and for the first time in hours, he could hear himself think. But then, something caught his eye. Through the kitchen's back door, just past the dumpsters, he saw a small figure moving in the shadows. At first, he thought it was a stray animal, but when he focused, his heart clenched. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. Her hair was tangled, her clothes were oversized and torn, and she was barefoot despite the cold pavement. But what truly broke Danielle's heart was what she was doing. She was digging through the restaurant's trash, pulling out half-eaten food, inspecting it, and then stuffing tiny bites into her mouth like she hadn't eaten in days. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen. The sight was jarring. How could a child be out here, alone, scavenging for food? His mind raced. Was she lost? Had she run away? Where were her parents? Daniel stepped forward cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, sweetheart," he called softly. The girl flinched, clutching a stale piece of bread in her small hands. Her wide, frightened eyes darted to him, and for a second, she looked like she might run. He raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's okay. You don't have to be scared. Are you hungry?" She hesitated, staring at him with a mixture of fear and desperation. Then, ever so slightly, she nodded. That was all Daniel needed. He turned back toward the kitchen. "Wait right here, okay?" he said gently. But as he walked inside to grab some food, something in his gut told him there was more to this than just a hungry child. And he was right, because when he returned, plate in hand, she was gone. That's when he knew something wasn't right, and that's when he called 911. Daniel's hands trembled as he lowered the phone after calling 911. His heart pounded in his chest. Where had she gone? She had been right there, her tiny, frail body hunched over the trash, too desperate to care who saw her. And now, she had disappeared like a ghost. He stepped out of the kitchen, scanning the alleyway, his breath clouding in the cold night air. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the pavement. His eyes darted left and right, searching for any sign of her. Nothing. Just the empty alley, the distant sounds of traffic, and the eerie silence that followed his own voice calling out, "Little one, are you there?" No answer. Daniel cursed under his breath. He had hesitated. Maybe if he had just brought her inside right away, instead of turning back for food, she wouldn't have run. But something about the way she had looked at him, those wide, terrified eyes, told him that food wasn't the only thing she feared. Minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the night. A police cruiser pulled up, red and blue lights flashing against the restaurant walls. Officer Ramirez, someone Daniel had seen around the neighborhood before, stepped out, her expression serious but kind. "You the one who called?" she asked. Daniel nodded, wiping his palms on his apron. "Yeah, she was just here, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was digging through the trash, eating scraps. And then she just vanished." Officer Ramirez took out a notepad. "Can you describe her?" Daniel swallowed hard, recalling every detail. Small, skinny, dark hair, kind of messy. She wasn't wearing shoes. Looked like she'd been out here a while. Ramirez exchanged a glance with her partner, a taller officer named Harris, who had been listening quietly. "You know her?" Daniel asked, catching their silent exchange. Ramirez hesitated. "We've had reports of a child matching that description. A couple of calls from different parts of the city. Always the same story. Seen alone, scavenging for food, then gone. Before anyone could help her, Daniel's stomach twisted. "She's been out here all this time." "We don't know yet," Harris said. "But we need to find her before something happens." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. She looked so scared. "I should have done more." "You did the right thing calling us," Ramirez assured him. "But if she's avoiding people, there's a reason." That thought unsettled Daniel even more. What was this little girl running from? The officers promised to check the area, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that she was still close by, watching, waiting. He stayed at the restaurant long after closing, standing by the back door, hoping she'd return. But she never did. That night, as he lay in bed, his mind wouldn't rest. Who was she? Where did she sleep? What had happened to her that made her so afraid? He had to know. The next morning, he made a decision. If no one else could find her, he would. Daniel didn't waste time the next morning. He arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, brewing a fresh pot of coffee, while his mind raced with possibilities. The girl was still out there, alone and hungry. That thought sat heavy in his chest. He had to do something. Instead of prepping for the lunch rush, he packed a bag, warm clothes, a few sandwiches, bottled water, and a small flashlight. If she was avoiding the police, she wouldn't come back to the restaurant. He had to find her where she felt safe. He walked through the nearby alleyways, past empty buildings, and forgotten corners of the city. He checked behind dumpsters, inside, cardboard shelters, anywhere a scared child might hide. He asked around, street vendors, other homeless people, shop owners. Most shook their heads, but a few had seen glimpses of a girl matching his description. "She doesn't talk to anyone," an old man in a tattered coat told him. "Like a ghost. Here 1 second, gone the next." Daniel nodded, pressing forward. He wasn't going to let her disappear again. As the sun started to set, he almost gave up. His feet ached, and his breath came out in tired puffs. But then, down a narrow alley, he saw movement. A small figure curled up against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. It was her. Daniel's heart pounded as he stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "Hey," he said gently. She looked up, eyes filled with the same fear as before, but this time she didn't run. "I brought food," he continued, slowly kneeling down, "and warm clothes. You don't have to be afraid." She stared at him, hesitating. Then, after a long moment, she reached out, taking the sandwich from his hand. She didn't speak, but the way she devoured it told him everything he needed to know. Daniel sat with her in silence, letting her eat. After a while, he asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated before whispering, "Lena." It was the first piece of the puzzle. Over the next few minutes, the rest came slowly. One-word answers, broken sentences. She had no parents, no home. She had been on her own for a long time, but there was something else, something she wasn't saying. Then, suddenly footsteps echoed from the alley entrance. Lena's eyes widened in panic. Daniel turned just in time to see a man standing there, his face shadowed under a hood. "There you are," the man muttered, taking a step forward. Lena clutched Daniel's sleeve, her fingers trembling. "No," she whispered. Daniel's gut tightened. This wasn't a random stranger. This was who she had been running from. "Back off," Daniel said firmly, standing between Lena and the man. The man scoffed. "She's coming with me." "No, she's not." Daniel didn't know exactly what was going on, but he knew one thing. Lena was terrified of this man, and he wasn't about to let her go. He reached into his pocket, gripping his phone. "The police are already looking for her. You should leave." The man's expression darkened, but after a tense moment, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Lena sagged against the wall, her breath shaky. Daniel crouched beside her. "You're safe now," he promised. "No one's going to hurt you." That night, he called Officer Ramirez and explained everything. Within an hour, Lena was wrapped in a warm blanket, sitting inside a patrol car. She was scared, but for the first time, she didn't look like she was ready to run. Daniel stood outside as Ramirez approached him. "You saved her," she said. "She saved herself," Daniel replied. "I just found her." Lena was taken into protective custody, given a safe place to stay, and connected with people who could help her. Before she left, she turned to Daniel and whispered, "Thank you." He watched as the car drove away, his chest tight. He knew he might never see her again, but that was okay. She was safe now. That was all that mattered. As he walked back to the restaurant, the city lights flickering around him, he realized something. Sometimes, the smallest moments, the quietest cries for help, could change everything. And sometimes, all it took was one person paying attention to make a difference.